I'll introduce myself just to start. My name is Cliff Robinson, and I'm joining you from the Princeton room at the Princeton Public Library, where I am the Public Humanities Specialist. This program was made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is my honor tonight to introduce John McMurtrie, General Editor of Literary Journeys, mapping fictional travels across the world of literature. The publisher describes the book as a beautifully illustrated guide to over 75 important journeys in world literature, spanning more than 30 countries and 2,500 years. Publishers Weekly calls it a transportive survey through which the book's contributors reflect on treks undertaken by characters in literary works ranging from Homer's Odyssey to Amor Towles' Lincoln Highway, adding that the bite-sized entries about each work offer punchy takes on celebrated literature, accompanied by plentiful photos of artwork inspired by the books or the locales discussed in them. The result is a trip well worth taking. I'm dropping now into the chat also a link to the book in our collection, though I will warn you that even though the book was only published on September 10th, the book it has been borrowed and there are already 4 holds on it. So
nice.
So I'd be remiss not to add that the book can be purchased by at the publisher, Princeton University Press. And I will add also the link to that. Oh, sorry, that's the link to the library's catalog entry. And you can put a hold if you want. But also the PUP, Princeton University Press item, you can check it out there as well, or your favorite bookseller. All right, so with that behind me, that brings us to our presenter. So John McMurtrie is the recently appointed nonfiction editor at Kirkus Reviews. Prior to taking on this role, he was editor at McSweeney's Publishing and books editor at the San Francisco Chronicle. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and Literary Hub. John, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Cliff. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah.
Nice. So we'll proceed tonight first with a short presentation of the book by John, then he and I will have a short conversation, and finally we'll open things up and let you ask questions to bring us to the end of the program.
All right. Shall I start?
The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. And I'm sorry I can't be with you. I haven't been to Princeton in forever. Happy memories of going to a wedding and playing some croquet and beautiful grounds. It wasn't sweltering hot, and I hope it's not the case now. So it's a beautiful place to be, summer or not. So, and I'm so glad that Princeton University Press picked this up. I mean, this is to have a publisher of this renowned in your backyard is a gift, and I really like them a lot. As a former books editor for a newspaper, I would get a lot of books from all sorts of publishers, of course, including university presses. And I always liked Princeton's approach, smart titles, but not too esoteric. So good books often for the general reader and really beautiful books. Cliff, I'll have you hold up the book here. I have my copy, but there we go. Yeah. And inside, you got some, not just the orange pages there. Excuse me.
I can find a
lot of images, a lot of
Yeah.
maps, paintings.
Some black and white, some color. Yeah.
So again, 78 essays about works of fiction. I worked with a team finding these and pairing them up together. And we wanted them to be about places perhaps that you've been to. Maybe you want to go there. Maybe you don't want to go there after reading these stories. That's sort of a tale where you like reading about it, but no way in hell would I ever want to venture there. So it's a gamut. And stories from, as Cliff was saying, from the beginning of time, as you know, oral histories, shall we say, with the Odyssey, and then we get into Chaucer and to the present day. So we wanted to cover a real chronological range, and then have stories from all over the world too, and all sorts of methods of travel. There's the automobile, of course. You've got on the road. There's plane travel, train travel, there bicycles. Not enough bicycles, I think. I don't know that there's a great bicycle novel out there. Maybe it has yet to be written. And I would say that the one in there, sort of in the middle of the book, maybe, by H.G. Wells, Wheels of Chance, not my favorite novel, but like certain movies or books, it's a great sort of window into a time, people's lives. Though, you know, it's dated. It just gives you a sense of England circa 1890, maybe. I don't remember the exact year, but I also, until working on this, hadn't known that H.G. Wells had written such a thing. You know, not really this futuristic mode of travel, the bicycle. But at the time, that was another thing too. It was becoming a new way to get around in a very democratizing way. So that aspect alone of it was cool. Also, I think as we got more to the present, as you might imagine, we got more inclusive, fewer white men from the West. And it's a really becomes a truly global book with authors from Japan and Korea, Bolaño from Chile, and Africa, and more female voices as well. And I wonder sometimes what would such a collection be like in 50 or 100 years? Just, you know, not just thematically, but who's telling the stories? So that's really important, right? Always. And I think in the present day, we have more of a sense of that. It didn't quite. I'm old enough, and sadly, I don't think you have to be that old to know that. I mean, in certain parts of the country, the stories that people read are not written by. I mean, it's willful in a lot of school districts cases. It's selective, shall we say. So yeah, a little selection of the, I could run some of the titles by you. There's Chaucer, as I mentioned, there's Robinson Crusoe. Around the World in 80 Days is an obvious choice. Conrad's Heart of Darkness, The Grapes of Wrath, Sheltering Sky, and I'm going chronologically here. Lolita, On the Road, True Grit by Charles Portis, The Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver, Life of Pi. So again, that's another thing too. This isn't all just on the road, you know, train tracks or in the air. There's Moby-Dick too, so Life of Pi, and there a couple books on rivers. Jerome K. Jerome, 3 Men in a Boat. Americanah, Chimamanda Adichie, Underground Railroad, Colson Whitehead. And then I wrote the last entry by Amor Towles, The Lincoln Highway. And many of you, I'm guessing, have read that. If you're big library people, he's been a hot shot now with only, I think, 3 books, maybe 4. And just, I thought that was a perfect yarn to sort of close it out with. And it's all modes of travel there. Although interestingly, he does a thing of a lot of stories are manifest destiny. It's going to the West, but I think that's the initial intent, is to go East Coast to West Coast, but then they just hightail it back to New York or in that direction. And it also has no less a character named Ulysses, and that wasn't intentional to sort of bookend this. But that's one aspect of this that's fun, is to see a lot of books in conversation with each other. And of course, the Odyssey inspires so many books, it has over time, and it really lays the groundwork. But then there are ways that there are things that pairings perhaps that you weren't aware of, or things that occur to you while I'm thinking about this. Yeah, Lolita, which I don't know that I honestly thought of it as a road novel, or some people might not think of it as a road novel. But it is. I mean, he goes on the road, and And I want to get into that maybe a little more, the on the road aspect, and I think what Nabokov is after, uh, not just in terms of straight plot, but I wanted to get in there Updike uh, and Rabbit Run as this sort of answer or challenge to I'm skipping ahead now. Of which there is a lot of in one of my, while I'm being digressive, while I'm digressing, Sebald, Max to his friends, the rings of Saturn. He's traveling in East Anglia, and it's constant digressions. So if I'm doing that, tip of the hat to him. But that actually, he's my kind of traveler, where he's musing as he goes, and it's that book is more or less him, I think, lightly novelized. Um, so these pairings, yes. So for me, on the road, Updike, um, I think with Rabbit Run was really setting a challenge and thinking, well, is it that simple, really? Can you just go out on the road and what sort of damages are you leaving for those behind? And for Henry Angstrom and his wife and family, there's a lot of that, and he's really writing about that middle ground, the suburbs. I don't have to tell you about John Updike, but to me, there's as much material there than and there are things to be written about in people's ordinary lives, and that should be captured as well as these extremes of heading out and without a map and just kind of winging it and having these crazy encounters with people. One book I would have loved to have included in here, maybe next time around, along those lines, is Independence Day by Richard Ford, and that's a father-son book on the road, and it's more of a quiet novel, I suppose. There's drama in Updike, but it's not exactly the same thing. Again, it's not that typical journey. Um, I would say a little bit just to the background of this. I had fun working on it during the pandemic. It wasn't the intent wasn't to have a book uh, about traveling while we were cooped up at home. It just ended up that way. But it was a minor blessing to look out this window and to think about places abroad and around the country to work on this. So that was fun. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was taking up paddle boarding, which is, I think, along with pickleball, something that people were doing. So I got those were my adventures, and I got to go on the water here, not far from the water where I am in the East Bay. And I would think, looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, knowing that Japan was the land beyond the bridge, and would sometimes think, without anyone around me for miles, maybe there are people in Japan looking toward the United States and thinking, what's going on there? So all that was going on in my head as I was helping put this together. Um, as you can imagine, some of the books in here, they're just tonally different. They're comic novels, they're tragedies. Don Quixote, uh, really setting the bar. And there's The Road, not too many laughs in Cormac McCarthy's novel. I'm afraid there's some works I'm afraid to go back to. I haven't read that since it came out. And I admire that novel a lot, but it really was so effective. I don't know if it has the same power. Perhaps you could tell me later. Uh, and there are a range of styles as well. Moby-Dick with these thorny sentences, elaborate sometimes, perhaps the exception of the first line. And then something like John Coetzee's a novel, The Life and Times of Michael Kay, which is really just pared down and lean. And that's, of all the books in here, I think that's the one novel. And I love it when books will do this, novels will do this, where I just stopped myself at one point and thought, wait, I'm reading a novel. And it was so effective. It was working on my brain that I was lost in it entirely. I wasn't aware that I was reading a book. And that's rare that that can happen. I mean, I know that I don't mean to sound pat, but it was just beautiful that the way he has you entranced. And that is a very spare novel. And it's about a different character who's a real innocent. Um, uh, Certainly dark. It's a dark novel as well, but I appreciated that it was not your standard adventure story by any stretch, and also it's so pared down that you have a sense that it's South Africa. But there's places really aren't named, if I'm remembering correctly. There's an unnamed war. Uh, the character is traveling to take his mother. He's taking care of his mother, who ultimately dies. I don't think that's a spoiler. Um, but it's a beautiful book. So I'm glad that that made the cut. And let's see, I've talked about the different modes of travel. I think some of these things too, the way that books are in conversation with each other. We think about The Grapes of Wrath being this humanitarian work of people really collectively. He didn't want to make this a polemical work, of course, but it is about the times and about people uniting and amid tragic circumstances. But there's a novel, a Dutch novelist, Tommy Wieringa, wrote a novel. These are the names, and it's almost the opposite in a way, where you have people, migrants. We don't know why they're leaving their Central European locale, but quite the opposite happens, where there's ugliness that comes from them being together, specifically in regards to a Black man. So to have that there, sort of an answer to Steinbeck, I thought was important too. And let's see what else I've got in here in my notes. Excuse me. I think of Barbara Kingsolver's novel, Poisonwood Bible. That got me thinking about the politics of the United States, of post-war America, of John Foster Dulles, and of this missionary character who goes abroad and thinks he's going to uh, make people, to shape them to his will and to make them good. And that's really an American strain. And to see that captured in a novel, I mean, I hadn't thought of it in that way, but I think it can, in this context of global politics, have you think in about such a thing in a different light, which I liked. Even perhaps Don Quixote, he's a do-gooder, he's clueless. So the father in Poisonwood Bible is also clueless. He's a really strong figure, but interestingly, his wife and children, they travel, but they actually learn about the place they are in Africa, whereas he goes there and remains the same, or if anything, it makes him more fixed in his views, which does not help him. There's a certain aspect in these stories too of people trying to outrun time, perhaps outrun death, and I think that's what I was alluding to with Lolita. Um, I don't think I'm the first person to say, but I don't know that I thought this the first time I read it, that it's not just a lark and that they're in the car together, that he's really trying to be frozen in the present to keep Lolita young. And it pairs so well with the setting, which is all about these hotels that and motels of bright, shiny American life where you're not looking toward the past. It's not Europe obsessed with the past and death. It's this sort of Las Vegas style. Just it's maybe this is not a well. I think of American cemeteries sometimes and how a lot of them they're not garden cemeteries where you're in this beautiful place that's often overgrown. Highgate Cemetery, Père Lachaise in Paris. It's more like a golf course here that we're avoiding death in that sense, in that space. And so I think there's some of that in these places in Lolita. And I think Olga Tokarczuk in Flights, her novel, the Polish novelist, it's a real intellectual novel, a novel of ideas. Her unnamed character, she talks about, she really teases out the ideas behind travel itself, and she gets into that. So it's a very modern day novel in that way, distinguishing between travel and tourism, and there are comic aspects to it as well. Thinking at one point her characters, perhaps this has happened to you too. She gets offered a pile of cash, I think it is. If you don't get on that flight, just take this money instead. And she thinks, well, maybe I could just make a living of this and go from just hang out in airports, buy tickets and get more money, live at the airport in a sense. So it's somehow related, I think, to being in planes and living in the air and cheating time, cheating death. I think sometimes I remember when the Concorde was a thing, you could literally do that. You could travel. I think the plane, you would leave London, say, and get to New York, and you'd see the same sunset, if my memory is correct. And there are people like Henry Kissinger who is sort of cheating time constantly, living in the air, doing this sort of thing. How much they were accomplishing on the ground is not quite known, but there was this perception of getting things done by traveling. I also, to leave you on this thought too, I think in the end I was thinking too of I was thinking of characters together. Wouldn't it be fun to have, or I was imagining certain characters from different books. I could see them as friends, say Maddie in Portis's True Grit, this tough as nails character, being with Yuri Herrera's, I think, unnamed character in Signs Preceding the End of the World, 2009 novel, where she's traveling from Mexico to the United States, and she's a real toughie. And so to have these people from different eras, suddenly I picture them hanging out together. Yeah. And they're even, there's Jack London's Call the Wild in here with Buck, I think, the dog, and then there's a cat in Traveling Cat Chronicles from Japan. So the cat speaks. Buck, it's been a while, but I don't think so. But to see them, cats and dogs, maybe, it's not going to happen, but that's what gets you thinking in this way, a book like this, I think. So I'm happy to take your questions too. Thank you. And thank you, Cliff. I'm sure you have many questions for me.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, John. That was great. That was a wonderful tour of all of these expeditions and journeys that
Thank you.
are collected here in a fabulous compendium. I'll emphasize again where you started. It really is fabulously illustrated, like I think generously illustrated throughout. So I didn't get a chance to show some of the larger ones. Like there are some that are like, the full binding, right? So like there's that one towards the end of the book. This one's lovely as well. This you can and I think in a way, like what's great about these illustrations is that it makes you want to travel, right? Like as you're going through it and you're reading these descriptions, the little narratives, little snapshots of the different novels and works of fiction included, you do find yourself like wishing you could get out there in some way. And, in a way, mentally getting out there, right? You're already anticipating where you're going to go. So I think that's a real success of this.
And also just if it's a painting that has to do with the time, certainly to place you. I don't, I do like, is it Flammarion, this French publisher that has those blank covers?
Yeah,
But often too many images are distracting, but here I think it helps because you're really traveling through time. So some guideposts, yeah.
no, it's
And
true. And it definitely helps to sort of locate each of these narratives in either a place or a trajectory or something like that.
right, not
Yeah,
so many author photos back in the 17th century, say, but there are portraits as well, paintings, author
right.
paintings. Yeah, we should have some of those maybe. Have that, yeah, come back. Yeah,
Bring that rather than presidential portraits, go for the
there we
authors,
go.
right? Yeah, nice. I like that
Remember they
idea.
would eat up the back of a book, like the full on, sometimes with
Yeah,
a dog or,
the author at home, right?
yeah. Mm,
Wonderful. All right. Well, I guess, yeah, I'll ask a few questions just to open us up, and then,
sure.
I'll certainly leave time for others to ask questions as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to start like very big picture and ask about something you wrote in the introduction. So you explained there that each work is selected uh, around three criteria. The work
Mm,
should be fiction, literary fiction specifically, that they should be based on travels to or from evidentially real rather than imaginary locations.
hmm.
And they should serve as a travel companion of sorts through the broadest possible reach of spaces and times.
Right.
So I just wondered if you could say a little more about why you chose those criteria, why you selected those.
Yeah. So I think just I think I was touching on that earlier, that these would be places that would strike a chord with people, either because they would have gone to such a place or hope to. This is armchair literature as well. And when I don't know that I'll come up with examples. Tony Hillerman, perhaps. This was decades ago in the Southwest. I love to try to um, find a book or books about a place I'm going to. So I think
Yeah,
um, this is that kind of book that I would turn to and say, "Oh, I'm going to Japan." Actually, I'm not, but I would love to. And so maybe this will spur me even more. Um, so I think a guide in that sense to have us think back in our to our own travels again, or ones we want to take. And I had something else to say about that too. I think in the introduction, yes, just um, writing about the present day without being too heavy-handed. I hope I wanted to say something about travel as a way of broadening our perspectives, opening our minds. And it doesn't happen to all the characters in these novels. Sometimes the exact opposite happens. But for the most part, as you can think, um, the without repeating this too much in these pieces, there's a lot of journeys within, right? People carrying their own baggage, people transforming themselves. So I think that's a reality that I think Twain talked about this and talked about wars as well, right? What's the famous line about geography and wars being the best way to teach Americans geography, something like this.
right. Yeah.
So just to be able to think of travel as a way of getting to know other people. And one of my favorite novels in here, Rachel Joyce's The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, where he leaves his, I think, suburban home. He's retired and goes to help an ailing friend. He thinks the way he wants to do it is by walking to her, to going on, and he along the way sheds his accoutrements, his phone, and he's essentially a pilgrim. He's not quite barefoot, but I think his his shoes get old and he doesn't want to replace them. But he meets people along the way and he talks to them, and it really changes him as a person. I don't think he was a misanthrope at the beginning, but it's very refreshing, to say the least, for him. It brings out the best in him. So I think travel can do that to all of us, either by surprise or sort of if we do that with intent, knowing that we need a little change. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Um, so one of the things that you mentioned in your remarks at the beginning, I thought I could dig a little deeper on this.
Hmm.
So companionship, it's a theme that runs throughout many of the narratives, as you already highlighted. The Odyssey gives us the very idea of mentorship, with the goddess Athena disguised as a man named Mentor coming to the young Telemachus, encouraging him to depart from Ithaca to find his father. Don Quixote, you can't really think Don Quixote apart from
Yeah.
Sancho Panza.
Yeah.
Maddie Ross, as you already raised her, Maddie
Yeah.
Ross. Rooster is joined by Rooster Cogburn for her journeys into the mountains of Oklahoma in pursuit of Tom Chaney, the man who killed her father. So I thought I'd ask, in that spirit, for whom do you imagine this book will be a travel companion? This is a phrase used in the introduction. So did you have a specific audience in mind for this book? You'd sort of touched on this in what you said just now, of
Hmm.
thinking Americans in some way, encouraging them to broaden their horizons. But
Sure.
was
Sure.
there a specific audience, or was it really this is for anyone?
No, I was thinking general readers. It's also being published in Britain, and
Okay.
I think the same could be said about people in Britain, and but the same could be said about, my mother was French, about people in France. Although I think people in Europe, they probably travel more than we do. Big country, they're
Right.
close to each other, they have all the history. Um, but I thought of it as a book for young people, maybe starting out, but also people who either have the money to go places, um, or older people who have the time, right?
Right.
Very envious. Uh, Between jobs, I, with my family, went to France for 5 weeks, and I don't know when that's going to happen next. So, and that perhaps plays into the concept of the differences between travel and tourism. Travel where you're perhaps truly lost, versus tourism where you're led, and you're sort of like those little kids who are walking down the street holding a rope, and you it's all been planned out for you. So I think it'd be cool for more of us to be able to live a life where you can go abroad and not have it be too programmed, and not be afraid as well. Certainly Americans were, um, perhaps we're a little bit timid or concerned or looking at travel alerts. I mean, there are places on Earth that are dangerous to go to, but uh, there are many people I know who are well educated who just don't like going abroad, and I think that's strange. So,
Yeah, I get that. It,
not in
what
Princeton
you're
though.
talking. Yeah, we're all great here.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, so in the spirit of what you're saying now, you were speaking to this question of a distinction between tourism and travel,
Yeah.
and maybe like rooting in place in some way, or at least like wandering about in place in some way.
Hmm.
Um, I I noticed this as I was going through the first part of Literary Journeys, which is
Mm.
quests and explorations. There are 21 fictional narratives there. These are uh, derived from antiquity up to the end of the 19th century, lands as distant from one another as Spain and Japan. So, going over this section of the book, I found myself wondering whether travel narratives and travel in this period didn't generally involve more of a sense of destination, both natural
Mm.
and spiritual. So, do you think travel narratives from that long prelude to the 20th century's revolutionary changes were more typically defined by a kind of terminus or an endpoint?
I think so, and a lot of them are, Pilgrim's Progress. There's an endpoint. There's this Christian journey, and I mean Chaucer. Right? They're only going
Yeah.
75 miles, I think it is, but so much of it is about religion, uh, and it's perhaps it goes by a different name now if we're doing it, on the road. Finding your bliss, right? I think that's the expression. It might not
Yeah.
be tied to religion exactly, um, But I would like to see more of that. I was wondering, I've seen books written about, say, the pilgrimage to in Spain to Santiago de Compostela. Um, and it's beautiful there. The mountains are. I was there in 1983. I'm not on a pilgrimage, um, but I'm suddenly. This is the beauty. I look over at the book, which is over there. I think the beauty of a book like this is it gets you thinking constantly. I hadn't thought of that place in forever, and now I want to go back there. First time I ever saw snow in summer. You can get snow in outside of the Alps and Pyrenees in Spain there. Uh, so I think there was a lot more of that. And people didn't stray too far from home, right? It was very communal living. There was no easy way to get about. I mean, you're going on foot, maybe horseback, and then for the privileged few, or if you were in the Navy, I guess, by boat. So it's only much later that you have these personal quests, and that's something too that I was thinking about recently, that I was alluding to people with money. I wish there were a little less, say, going to Mount Everest and going there to check something off your bucket list, that rather loathsome term, to do this for really narcissistic reasons, in a way that just you're not really going there and meeting people. You're climbing this thing, and then you can brag about having climbed the tallest mountain, when there are plenty of mountains in the world, and people live in the mountains. You can meet them. You can go to the north of Spain and do this, right? You don't have to do
Right.
this silly thing. So that is one fascinating aspect of the book, of seeing um, the different eras, and not just the modes of travel, but the reasons. And warfare is is the backdrop for a lot of these journeys, right? People stayed behind the same way that has happened in the last century. People staying behind, say, in France, literary figures or musicians. I'm the product of war. So, yeah, both world wars. Grandfathers in World War One, and France and the United States, and uncles World War II. And that's how my father got to meet my mother. So yeah, so war can unite people too.
Yes, yeah. Has to end eventually until it
Right.
starts again, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, thanks. Well, you mentioned the 20th century. Coming to that, the second and third parts are really devoted to the 20th century, the age of travel and
Yeah,
postmodern movements, respectively. So these are differentiated from the quest and adventure of the first part, not only insofar as they may lack a kind of finality at a journey's endpoint.
right.
They also involve, as you've stressed, new modes of conveyance.
Mm,
And so ever more sophisticated technology, the ocean liner and train give way to the automobile and the highway system. In your
mhm.
opening remarks, you highlighted the automobile, the car, as sort of a iconic, um, I don't know, idea, I guess you could say, of American travel literature for sure.
Mhm, mhm,
Not
mhm.
only something like Kerouac's On the Road, of course, you can't imagine Neil Cassidy as Dean Moriarty without, his stewardship of the vehicle.
Right.
Um, Similarly, Lincoln Highway, yeah, I love that idea of it's the eastward journey and a kind of
Right.
reversal taking place. I thought
Yes.
that was clever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, what do you think about the role of technology in defining these journeys? Is it something that intensifies in the 20th century and then sort of irreversibly changes how we experience travel? Or does something like Rachel Joyce's The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, preserve a mode of conveyance that's,
Sure.
as old as our bodies, right?
Yeah, I think we are, well, we're walking creatures, right? So that we will always have that, and maybe it's going to be like the road. If maybe it's that dark where we're back to wandering and just avoiding danger. Uh, But I think more happily, yeah, I think perhaps we've reached an end point. Sometimes I think about that. Maybe you've seen these old images, again, from France, uh, imagining the future, men delivering mail. They've got these wings flapping, and here's your mail, delivering it to a window, stories above the ground. So beyond Amazon, maybe there are devices traveling, jetpacks. So who knows what the future holds in that sense? Jules Verne would probably have some great ideas. Probably
Yeah.
better at conceiving the ideas than in the actual writing. I was finding again, it had been a while. Around the World in 80 Days, not a lot of character development. Um, so we don't know what's going to happen technologically in the future, but this book did have me thinking yet more about, say, my own life and how I've been biking more and walking more. And again, with the paddleboarding, like biking, what really I loved about that being on the water is that there's no route at all, and you're completely guided by the wind, um, where the waves will take you, and there's this freedom, for lack of a better word, that we just you're guided by roots everywhere in life, and so to have to be lost in that way, or to just think, "Oh, I think I'll paddle over there. I'll check that out." There's a beauty in that. So I think um, there's still more. Yes, there's a good biking novel to be written without being too heavy on the biking. Yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
I, plenty
That's great.
plenty more travel stories. They, without going to Mars, Elon Musk style. There still many more adventures to be taken.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the road, and I wanted to touch on the fourth part as well. So this is contemporary
Oh,
crossings. We're looking at the 21st century now, and yeah, perhaps no fiction more perfectly captures the distinctive quality of contemporary crossings than the road. These, as the introduction to that section says, they involve migration, escape,
mm-hmm.
displacement, finding a new life.
Mm,
So here we have a post-apocalyptic, ruined world that somehow still shelters an abiding love between a father and a son, in spite
mm-hmm.
of the apparent hopelessness of their survival. You
Right.
mentioned Tommy Moringas. These are the names. Similarly, it's a devastated and devastating landscape on the Ukrainian steppe,
Mm-hmm.
but somehow humanity dimly flourishes among
Mm-hmm.
exploitation and exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, looking at that section, one of the questions that came to my mind was whether you can see a similar sort of anticipation of these types of dislocation and devastation in earlier periods, right? So I'm thinking of Paul Bowles, The Sheltering
Right.
Sky,
Yeah.
Rabbit Angstrom, though he returns home, does he really return to his life in any sense?
Right.
And then, of
Yeah.
course, you mentioned Michael Kay. He
Mm-hmm.
comes back to Cape Town, but um, there is his experience anything more than destitution. So these are, in some ways, these are postmodern narratives or even older. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. What do you think? Like, is this sort of something that travel has always brought out as a possibility for humans?
Yeah, I think there's so many of these stories that are timeless, that have timeless themes. I mean, the road, it's essentially biblical, but it's just the settings that are different. But when it comes down to it, yeah, these are people trying to survive and get by and not be killed. Uh,
Right.
uh, and what am I going to eat? And can I get along with these people, or do they present a danger? Um, so humans as creatures, and I think that's really, again, that speaks to the beauty of Michael Kay. And thanks for reminding me that Cape Town is actually mentioned by name. Yeah, of course. Um, so, and it did have me thinking, what sort of fiction will we see in the future with climate change alone, we're going to have a lot of mass migration, right?
Yeah.
And Lord knows, I hope not more warfare related to that, but there will be shortages of water and food, and so there will likely be more stories like Tommy Wieringa's, Michael Kay, that will play out. I sometimes think, yeah, how innocent will so many of these stories look like? Even Chaucer, in so many ways, seems so playful. It's been a while, but I don't want to. I hope we don't lose that that humanity in us as well, of enjoying life, right, and looking at it ironically. And but those are growing up. Those were my favorite novels. Vonnegut and Joseph Heller and Quixote, being able to laugh at the
Yeah.
miseries in life. So that there are novels where it's not quite possible. Uh, there are glimmers of hope, as you say. So at least let's have that, if not the humor.
That's right. And hopefully some laughs along the way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I did say I'd leave time for questions, and I don't want to forego that. So if
Yeah.
anyone has questions, I can take them through the Q&A or through the chat. So please feel free to add questions.
And while you're thinking about that, I'm suddenly wondering about, I talked about Dulles, not to be unjust to him, but Woodrow Wilson as well, right? There was a lot to him, and how he was trying to better the world. And I think there was some redrawing of maps in Europe, perhaps Yugoslavia. Wasn't he involved with that?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Forget you, all you scholars will know, but certainly with the League of Nations, there was that goal in
Right.
mind. That plays into the American character in 20th century thinking, which is reflected, I think, again in a novel like Kingsolvers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm not seeing questions yet. So again, please add them if you have them. You can go to the Q&A or the chat, and I'll stop whatever I'm saying and divert right to your questions if you have them. But I do have a couple more I'll ask since
Yeah, yeah.
since there's an opening. Yeah, so I guess you mentioned the Rings of Saturn's already, but I thought that for me, when I was reviewing the compendia that appear along the way, um, I was thinking of this and relating to the description of the novel, which I haven't read. I really should. That people everywhere experienced a time kind of like the narrator, where we were through the pandemic's onset and in the immediate aftermath, we were all confined, experiencing isolation, and we could really only reminisce on our own journeying about and our own quests, whatever they may be. So, in that space of memory, I guess I was wondering after 2 points you make about human nature at the beginning. So you say it's sort of fundamental to humans that we can't sit still. We must roam the earth out of a keen yearning to travel.
Right, right.
And second, you observe that just as fundamentally, we are storytellers, adding that for millennia, we have thus been drawn to tell stories of our fundamental desire to venture far from home. So I guess I was wondering about the relationship between travel and memory. Do you see that there is something about travel that particularly sticks it in memory and a sort of, I'm thinking of like a Wordsworthian space of recollection or something like that, right? Is there something like that distinctive about travel?
Yes, and I think maybe let me talk about I'm going to get woo on you. I'm going to set this up so I sound like I'm a loon. But something I was wondering about recently is magnetite, this crystal that is in certain animals, I think birds and eels, perhaps. Um, these creatures who know how to travel thousands of miles, they're led to these magnetic fields. That's something in their bodies can essentially read, right? And I think humans have a little bit of magnetite in us, and maybe it's environmental. You don't want too much of the stuff, I think. But so I'm not entirely serious about that substance being in us, but I do think that there's something at play where, again, I'm going to go back to my own roots. I was born in Boston, but shortly after my parents, we moved to France and lived there. It was my first language. And so my earliest memories are from there. And so many smells that I can conjure up now that words, you cannot find words to describe such a thing. But I've been back to these places, for instance, the stairwell where my grandparents lived, and this kind of sweet smell of the wood and the stone that I have not smelled anywhere else on earth. And that's, I mean, it's distinct to that one spot or certain plants. Even just tar being poured on the road. I know that's not special, unique to France, but all that was seared in my brain somehow. And so I think there is something to us traveling, being somewhere when we're young, and that's locked. And so this idea of nostos, of homecoming from the Odyssey, which is the basis of nostalgia, which the French could bottle and sell at airports, right? Air de nostalgie. It's an industry, but it's so true, steeped in the past. That this sense of going home, I think it is it's in us as well somehow, not just birds and eels. I think we have innate within us, even without being aware of it. This, I think Proust probably had it right, going back to childhood, he among others. What do you think about that, Cliff?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. As you were talking, I was remembering, talking about scents, I was remembering some of the places from my own childhood, like my grandparents'
Mm,
lake house. You're absolutely right. There's something in that. I think Catherine Widener in the Q&A has a comment here, more of a comment
mm,
than a question. She's suggesting maybe it's more of a sense that leads you home. In
mm,
keeping with where you started with was it magnetite? I'm trying to remember the name of the
right.
mineral. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I
right.
don't feel that pang for Boston. No offense. I mean, it's France too, that helps, I suppose. But yeah, if I have a longing for a place or sense of nostos, it's France for me.
Well, in that spirit, I think the other question that came through on the chat would be a good one to ask. If you have the Nostos above all to, you know, return to France in some way, then do you have a favorite journey story or novel? This is a question from the audience.
Personal?
Sounds like
Oh,
it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
personal. Let's see. I think the best journey I went on, and I haven't thought of this in a while, was traveling. I think I mentioned 1983, but even in that sense, I haven't thought about it in a bigger picture. Traveling for 3 months around Europe with my brother after high school. He was on a year abroad, so I joined him there. Leased a deux chevaux Citroën, which I'm sure many of you know about, this lightweight car that I think they were essentially banned eventually in this country. They're so light that you could parallel park it. Two people pick up the back end. Great for parking in European capitals and tight spots.
It's important.
And I
Yeah.
remember going airborne in Germany over some rail tracks, and we looked at each other and thought, and we were with a friend as well. Yes, we need to turn around and do that again. Do the streets of San Francisco. Uh,
Yeah.
Went to Yugoslavia when it was Yugoslavia, before the
Wow.
country fell apart. Went um, to Vesuvius, and probably not possible to do this anymore, but I think my brother, who's got a better memory, uh, somehow. How does that work? Uh, so we stayed past closing hours atop Mount Vesuvius. I think we must have hidden and camped out there overnight. So when we woke up with the steam there and the light off the bay, that was
Wow.
very cool. That alone was worth the trip. And I think I can still smell that spot as well, the sulfur.
I
Short
believe that. It's a
walks,
powerful
man.
mineral indeed. Yeah.
I recommend going there if you can do that without getting arrested. Also slept on ice in the Alps, I
Wow.
remember, which is not all that uncomfortable. What was uncomfortable is showering in a stream in the Alps. You do it quickly. I mean, a fountain, a waterfall, I suppose. I could go on about that trip. If you have time, I will regale you. Uh, did not have much money, uh, so we were sleeping in the car often. I remember using the hose in front of the museum in Athens. Let's just wash up here a little bit. Yeah, different times. I wasn't wearing the
Absolutely.
sport jacket.
Still the same person in some way, though.
Sleeping on the beach. Uh, I recommend Santorini. Many of you have probably, well, you know that place or have been to that island, but there's volcanic rock and your body can conform. I mean, you just fit your way into it. It's a very comfortable place for sleeping.
Amazing. Um, yeah, I guess then just as a follow-up, is there a narrative favorite of the among these fictions? I mean, I think in many ways what I'm hearing, John, is that you yourself have a great travel fiction to write at some stage built
Yeah,
around all these experiences. But
yeah.
um,
But
yeah, what do you think?
with all the drama that occurs along the way too.
Absolutely, yeah, especially with a companion who is family, right?
I would, and then when you make it three people, that's where I'm one of three, and I'm a middle child, so three people, it's
Same.
hard sometimes. It's one against two, two against one, right? So there was some of that on this trip. This is being recorded so I could send it to my brother. He could tell me when I was wrong. Uh, Yes, I have not thought about fictionalizing any of my life in that way, but if I were to write about it, perhaps that would be good to protect the innocent. Um, Straight up fiction for this collection, I think I mentioned it already. Rachel Joyce's Unlikely Pilgrimage. That and perhaps The Tolls. I mean, The Tolls I wrote about, so I thought about it differently, but I hadn't read the Rachel Joyce before. It's just a real joy. Sweet story without being too sweet. And it's perhaps rare as an English story in that sense. Uh, but that might be reflective of the times as well. And maybe not all Brits are alike, right? There's some heart there.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't think of a better place to end than with an endorsement of two great works of fiction that if you haven't read, you should check out, and definitely check out the book Literary Journeys again. John, I'll thank you for taking the time to speak with us tonight,
Thanks
and
so much.
yeah, be
Hope
well.
hope to journey to Princeton before too long. Meet you
And
there.
same for me to San Francisco. Maybe we'll have tea or coffee or something like that
Like
when we
that.
do.
All
All
right. Thank you
right.
very much.
All right. You take care. Good night, everyone.